Hey, we can't hear the piano.
Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the varieties and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. These words to call us into this space attributed to Kalidasa. Welcome, you all, to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Central Oregon. It is so good to be together, whether you are here in this room with us. The novelty has not worn off at all yet. It is still really good to gather in this space. Or if you're with us online on Zoom, we are glad that you're there as well. We are two places and one congregation these days. So welcome on this good morning as we are going to be looking at some Unitarian Universalist history. Some of you, when I say that, think, yay, history, I'm a history buff. Some of you think, oh my dear, I did not look at the sermon title before I came, and this could be a droll and dry affair. We will do our best to not make it that. I am also noticing that the front row is empty again. We like our front row full because the folks on Zoom can only see this half of the congregation and they think that no one's here if no one sits in the front. And we put prizes up front, but then we just realized about 5 minutes before service that might have looked like don't sit here because there's Play-Doh on the seat. So Anastasia gets some Play-Doh because she's sitting in the front seat. If anyone else would like some Play-Doh or colored chalk, you may make your way down to the front anytime during the service, and we will be having prizes on our front seats for the next few weeks to remind you that the front seats are also available for sitting in. And this is not unique to us. In churches across the land, the front pew is never sat in. So yes, thank you, Dustin. Welcome to the front row, where good things flourish, the front row. Speaking of flourishing, we are blessed and lucky this morning to have Greg playing guitar with us, and we have a quartet of singers with Maggie and Tom and James and Judy. If you have musical talents, or dancing talents or juggling talents or talents in general. That is what is getting us through this time where we can't all sing together. Since we can't congregationally sing, it becomes more important for us to find different ways to experience music together, because we know that music is an essential part of who we are and how we worship. Welcome to the front row, Randy and Dick. Enjoy your chalk or Play-Doh. So as we are looking through Unitarian Universalist history today, I will invite you to keep this question with you along the way. So what? What does it matter? Our history. It's where we come from. So as we hear different places in our Unitarian and Universalist and Unitarian Universalist history today, I'll invite you just to keep that question on your heart. What does this even matter? And why does this matter to me? Well, our reading this morning invited us to think to this day. We know that the past is but a dream, and the future but a vision. But today, this day, is the moment, the time that we have. And so let us begin this morning with our hearts in a seat of gratitude as our quartet sings. Actually, we're going to be a quintet, maybe a septet, actually. Our septet sings, We Give Thanks. It's number 1010 in our teal hymnal. But on our non-singing days, we'll just invite you to sit back and enjoy this song.
At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
Good morning. I'm Chayla Sloper, the Congregational Life Facilitator, and I have today's announcements. This month's theme is holding history. And as we are gathering together again, there are some traditions that some of you will remember, and I'm going to need you to help bring us forward. And that is, we will be decorating the sanctuary. We call it Deck the Halls on Saturday, December 4th. And anybody who remembers about the tree lights and where the trees go and decoration, it's going to be a little bit different. We won't have a potluck this year, but if you remember and if you are interested in helping, please talk to me. And I do want to make a special welcome for all gathered here and those far away. We were just singing that. And for our congregation who is connecting, those of the congregation who are connecting with Zoom, a special warm good morning to you. Okay, so yes, the same day as Deck the Halls will be the Bend Christmas Parade. And what our religious exploration group has decided is that if you want to take a tea light, there's going to be a way to bring your own wish for the world, for the community, put a word on that tea light, and then the tea lights are going to be on our float. UUFCO is going to have a float in the parade. So more immediately, so Sparky, our Fireflies mobile library, bookmobile, is parked out in front, and you can just celebrate what Fireflies has been doing, bringing books and the love of learning to children in our community. This is now the fundraising time for Fireflies and the Jars of Joy. There is a catalog available in the weekly email. So check out that, a beautiful house that will be raffled. And there are also aprons. Liz Doherty's beautiful aprons will be available for sale as well. The environmental justice, are you doing this after second service today as well? Okay, very good. So just wanting to make sure the environmental justice group has been looking at putting up a solar panel project for here on the building. When the building was built, it was built with solar capacity, and now there is work toward having a proposal so that we can be solar equipped. So on the patio, there'll be a table to talk about that after service today. Deepen Your Spirituality meets again this Tuesday at 7:30. This Thursday for Nourish, which is our social justice initiative that's looking at food insecurity issues in the community. There will be a drive for produce and perishables from noon to 2 this Thursday. We're also collecting for our homeless outreach. If you have warm clothing, coats, hats, scarves, sweats, particularly some of the larger sizes, there's a bin out in the front, and we'll be collecting those through November 28th. Or you can purchase $15 gift certificates like for the Dollar Tree stores or Fred Meyer, and that will help our homeless community through some tough times. So it is really good to be here together. And of course, I wish you all blessings on your day. I forgot. Yes, I do also just want to thank you for learning these new habits as we're gathering together, like remembering to leave your name tag here. This is really important. It's actually for the purpose of our doing contact tracing. So it really is critical that you have, that you leave your name tag here. And I know some folks took them home last week after the dedication of the sacred grounds, but all the same, be sure to leave your name tag. And then if you're open to handshakes or hugs, get a green ribbon. And that is a go for making it warm and friendly. So blessings on your day.
Double blessings on your day. You got it twice. So for our time for all ages today, I would like to proclaim, to dictate, to profess The sky is green. All right. Amen. All right. Yeah. All right. Sky is green. Sky is green. Who's with me? Really? Nope. Really? A time frame. Ah, right. I mean green today. The sky is green today. No? That's not your experience. What a Unitarian Universalist answer to that question. But are you sure? Because I said it. I'm the minister, right? I'm wearing, I've got the stole. I held my hands up in a very important way. I mean, I even slammed the pulpit and still nothing. Right? Nothing? No? All right.
Most people are colorblind. Those two colors are the ones they keep.
Oh, so no, I think it's green. It's not colorblind. Is that the issue? I'm telling you that it's green and you're not believing me, and good job, right? That's good. That's discerning religion. That's just being people of discernment, of reason, of exploration. So today being History Day, I want to read you something from Sophia Lyon-Fahs. It's from Today's Children and Yesterday's Heritage. She wrote this in 1952. And Sophia Lyon-Fahs was basically the architect of how we as Unitarian Universalists approach religious exploration. This idea that we create environments rather than dogma. So she writes, how much difference does it make how a child comes to his beliefs? Is the how as significant as the what? Suppose a child is led to feel that he ought to believe what he hears because the Bible tells him so. Or suppose he's encouraged to question the standards of long ago and the ways that people used to think about God by asking why they felt as they did, and why today some people feel and think differently. How much difference will these two ways of dealing with the ideas and practices make in that child's personality development? And she goes on to cite research, a research project where they found children who are highly opinionated and very prejudiced, and children who were less so. And then they got them all together. And what they found was this. The children who had been accustomed to authoritarian controls were already becoming authoritarian in their attitudes towards others. Having been obliged to accept conformity for themselves, they demanded it for others also, and they tended to condemn those whose ways were different. On the other hand, the group of children who had lived in liberal homes were found to be more tolerant of differences and more able to maintain an equilibrium and individualized approach to people of different types. They took internal values more seriously than external appearances. They were more oriented towards love and less toward power. So Sophia Lyon-Fahs wrote that in 1952. And in doing that, she began to think of a different way of doing Sunday school. Now, I know that I was raised in a Sunday school class where there was lots and lots of love, but there was also a lot of information. And the information that I was getting was the truth, the capital T truth. And so Sophia Lyon-Fahs came and turned everything on its head and said, perhaps the way to spark the religious instinct in our children is not to tell them what to believe, but to show them what love looks like, to create environments of love and compassion for our children. And from that, from those values, comes the religious impulse. Less about information, less about facts, less about authoritarian dogma and doctrine and creedalism. But no, what is it that our religion is pointing to? What do we want our children to experience? We want our children to experience love. We want to experience love. And so, Sophia Lyon-Fahs would say, in our Sunday school classes, our religious exploration classes, And indeed, in our church services on a Sunday, what matters most is how we show up, how we are to one another, and how we live out our religion. It's not about the creeds of what we believe, but how we are together. Indeed, how we love together. Our children aren't here yet with us, but a meeting last week would say that in January, we're going to begin our in-person religious exploration classes for our children again, and that will be a glorious day because there's something missing, right? On Sunday mornings without children in our space, without youth in our space, well, some youth in our space, but without all of our youth in our space. And so we're looking forward to that day, and that will be great. And until then, we hold space, we hold them in our hearts, wherever they are in the world right now. We look forward to the day that we are as a whole community in this space and online. And until then, we say the Children's Covenant in their honor, with them on our hearts and them in our memory and our hope, and looking forward to an eager anticipation to when our families and children are with us again. The Children's Covenant is in your fresh sheet, printed small. I hope that if you have readers, you brought them. And we'll say together the Children's Covenant. In this place, I'm kind. In this place, I'm happy to report that we have gotten back on track after not having Joys and Sorrows written out for the last few weeks because people, it seems, maybe didn't remember that we do this. We have some Joys and Sorrows this morning, so that is my joy. This morning is that we have Joys and Sorrows this morning. I don't doubt that every Sunday that we have Joys and Sorrows that might not be written on a page, but here we have them this morning. So while I'm reading the Joys and Sorrows, if there's a joy or sorrow in your heart that you'd like to light a candle for, please feel free to do so. Those are on the sides of our sanctuary. You can do that during our Joys and Sorrows time. You can also do that during our reflective music, during our offering, just to allow us space and spaciousness as we're doing that. So our Joys and Sorrows written today, Erica Beard Irvine writes, a joy for the parents who can finally get their kids vaccinated against COVID. They are so happy and relieved, and I am one of those parents. Indeed, I am happy and relieved. Thanks to the women of UUFCO who brought us together for the bread and soup exchange. So nice to share gratitude around the fire. Greg Byrne writes that my son, Sam, got a great job at UW using his new Master of Public Health degree. Well done, Sam and Greg. Jennifer Seitz shares a sorrow with our community. I lost my Aunt Mary, my mom's sister, on Friday. It was of natural causes. I'm sorry, Jennifer. Chayla Sloper is happy to have spent a very full week in California last week and happier to be home and here again. Alice Elshoff shares with us this morning, I visited Cal's grave in the desert at the foot of the Steens, and all day the sky was filled with thousands of Arctic geese and swans going south. It was magical. Also, thanks so much to all of you that sent cards of understanding last spring. They meant so much to me. The art committee shares another joy from art that we had the reception for the Ted Gladow show currently hanging in Linus Pauling. The show was hung in March of 2020. And if you'll remember March of 2020, that was an auspicious March. And we finally had the reception Friday, November 12th of 2021. Ted spoke about his art. Reverend Scott spoke about what it meant to him for all these months of COVID closure. We had 35 guests and it was wonderful. Our committee also says that they are just over the moon about the first brand new show in 2 years, and remind us that the Spirit of Winter is the first new show in 2 years, opening on December 10th. And that's in the Linus Pauling, which is that room right outside the sanctuary. Melissa Adams shares a mixed joy and sorrow. The last several years have been so trying, and I felt so lost. I'm trying to find my way home. I recently went on a healing retreat, and it brought up so many feelings. I'm so joyful for the fact that UUFCO community has been coming together again. Helen shares a sorrow that my anti-vaxxer brother came down with COVID. He's in the COVID ward, and please wish him well. Nicole shared that a friend is joining me today at service and in person. And Dick Falsus shares, thanks, Randy, for the French toast this morning. We know that there are joys and sorrows in each one of our lives because this is the way of life. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, but as a fellowship, as a community, as a people who are caring, we know that we never need do either alone, our joys or our sorrows. Well, at this time, we will take our morning offering to support the work of this fellowship. The work of this fellowship is so varied, so deep, so wide. We do all kinds of things for the community, for each other. That happens through the sharing of your generous resources. So Paula will play an homage to Ravel. And this is an original piece of Paula's. And I just love hearing Paula play the piano, don't you? This was a bad idea. History through the written word. About midweek, I realized that that was a little bit too vague, too large, too much to handle for one service. It should have been, I don't know, broken down a little bit. Maybe, Unitarian theology through the written word, or feminism through Unitarian Universalism over the ages, or the history of race in our tradition and our faith. But no, I said UU history, which is large and long. And even the title, UU history through the written word, is the most boring title I think I have ever come up with in 10 years of ministry. Something about it midweek, I thought the word history and written word would have some kind of depth and meaning, and they would pop. And then I realized they don't. It's just dry. UU history through the written word. So here we go, nonetheless. We've chosen 6 different places in our Unitarian Universalist and Unitarian Universalist history to give us a glimpse into some of what we have been and where we have been. So let's begin at the beginning, the origins. Let's begin with Origen, who was one of the Christian church fathers, one of the earliest theologians. And Origen wrote in 225 the first idea around the first principles of universalism, that God is a God of love, and as such, there could be no hell because God is a God of love. And so I began with Origen, thinking that that would be the right place to start. But Origen's writing is so dry, so droll and boring, that we were not going to subject that to you. So we're skipping Origen this morning, and we're going straight to Arius, who's also a little boring, but less so than Origen. Arius wrote in 325, the Council of Nicaea. Constantine was looking to consolidate the empire, and he needed religion as a piece of that. But the problem was there were too many different Christianities all at the same time. He needed one way of being Christian, because that's a lot better of a way of having control over the populace. Authoritarianism. He would not have liked our religious exploration classes. So Arius was a popular priest in Alexandria, Egypt. And he came to the Council of Nicaea. And on one side with Athanasius, who was preaching and debating on behalf of the Trinitarian structure, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And over in this corner, we have Arius, who said, no, God is one, a Unitarian, small u, Unitarian theology. They duked it out in a battle of words, and as you can guess, Athanasius won. History as well as theology is written by the winners. But we trace our history back to Arius and those words that he spoke at the Council of Nicaea back in 325 about God's unity.
Listen up, folks. This is dense. Wise is God, since he himself is wisdom's teacher. There is proof enough that God is invisible to all, and to those through the Son and to the Son himself, the same God is invisible. I will say exactly how the invisible is seen by the Son. By the power by which God can see, and in proper measures, the Son sustains the vision of the Father as is right. Or rather, there is a Trinity with glories not alike. Their existences are unmixable with each other. One is more glorious than another by an infinity of glories. To sum up, God exists, ineffable to the Son, for he is to himself what he is, that is, unutterable. So the none of the things said will the Son know how to express comprehensively. For it is impossible for him to explore the Father who exists by himself, for the Son himself does not know his own essence. For being Son, he truly came to be at his Father's will. What logic then permits the one who is from a Father to know by comprehension the one who begot him? For clearly, for what has a beginning, to encompass by thought or apprehension the one who is unbegun is impossible.
Clear as a bell, correct? How did he lose that argument at the Council of Nicaea? I don't understand. But he did. So now, as I mentioned, we're going to have to skip some stuff, and that might make you uncomfortable. We're going to skip a lot. We're going to go straight to the 1700s. And I know what you're thinking, straight to the 1700s, that means we're not going to talk about Michael Servetus, right? And on the errors of the Trinity that he wrote in 1531. How can you do a history sermon and not talk about Michael Servetus? But we're not going to. And you're also thinking, but Francis David was in there as well. And you've got to talk about the Edict of Torda in 1538, the first edict of the first proclamation of religious freedom that was done by King Sigismund III. How could you not talk about that? But I'm not going to talk about that. And you're also noticing, if we're going to the 1700s, that I won't be talking about the Cambridge Platform in 1648, which was the group of people who gathered together and said, congregational is a good way to organize church. And it's still the way that we organize our church today, the Cambridge Platform. But we're not talking about that today. We are going straight to 1790. Judith Sargent Murray. She wrote essays and was the first published American advocate for women's right. In her published works, she focused on two things: universalism and the rights and status of women. She eventually ended up marrying the Reverend John Murray. And I know what you're thinking, John Murray, he's the guy who preached the first sermon, the Universalist sermon on American soil. That's exactly the same guy. They were married and were kind of considered the power couple of the day, Judith Sargent Murray and John Murray. They hung out with the Washingtons and the Franklins. But Judith Sargent Murray made her name by sticking it to the man, so to speak. She was having none of it. She had, if you can believe it, I'm sure you can, to write in favor of women not being inferior to men. She proposed that that is completely erroneous, and that it is only that women lack the education of men. And should women be educated, they would have the same status, or perhaps even more. So she wrote a lot of straightforward essays where she was just coming out swinging. But she also wrote poetry. And so we're going to hear a few of her words this morning.
That minds are not alike, full well I know. This truth each day's experience will show. To heights surprising, some great spirits soar, with inborn strength mysterious depths explore. Their eager gaze surveys the path of light, confessed it stood to Newton's piercing sight. Deep science, like a bashful maid, retires, and but the ardent breast her worth inspires. By perseverance, the coy fair is won, and genius, led by study, wears the crown. But some there are who wish not to improve, who never can the path of knowledge love, whose souls almost with the dull body one with anxious care each mental pleasure shun. Weak is the leveled, enervated mind, and but while here to vegetate designed. The torpid spirit mingling with its clod can scarcely boast its origin from God. Stupidly dull, they move progressing on, they eat and drink, and all their work is done. While others, emulous of sweet applause, industrious seek for each event a cause, tracing the hidden springs whence knowledge flows, which nature all in beauteous order shows. Yet cannot I their sentiments imbibe, who this distinction to the sex ascribe. As if a woman's form must needs enroll a weak, a servile, an inferior soul, and that the guise of man must still proclaim greatness of mind and him to be the same. Yet as the hours revolve, fair proofs arise, which the bright wreath of growing fame supplies. And in past times, some men have sunk so low that female records nothing less can show. But imbecility is still confined, and by the lordly sex to us consigned. They rob us of the power to improve, and then declare we only trifles love. Yet haste the era when the world shall know that such distinctions only dwell below. The soul unfettered, to no sex confined, was for the abodes of cloudless day designed. Meantime, we emulate their manly fires, though erudition all their thoughts inspires. Yet nature with equality imparts, and noble passions swell even female hearts.
Preach it, Judith. So fast forwarding just a handful of years to 1805, Hosea Ballou. And yes, if you're nervous that I might not talk about Hosea Ballou's A Treatise on Atonement, I am going to talk about Hosea Ballou's A Treatise on Atonement because it was such an important and seminal Universalist tract. You see, people believed in universalism, but it wasn't until Hosea Ballou came along and wrote all this down that it became more widespread. He wrote this book, and it was the most widely read book on universalism at the time. He rejected the view held by Roman Catholics and Protestants at the time that sin was an infinite crime against God that called for an infinite satisfaction through the sacrifice of God himself. Instead, he proposed that Christ called humanity to atonement with God by demonstrating God's love and giving example of a godly life. And so, after he wrote this book, he became quite popular, though he did not go to Boston, which was where all the Unitarians and the Universalists who were hip were hanging out at the time, because John Murray, remember him? He currently lived in Boston and had a church there. And he did not quite square with Ballou's version of universalism. So Hosea Ballou, being polite, waited until John Murray died, and then went to the Second Universalist Church of Boston that had been founded especially for him. And so now we'll hear a bit from that, A Treatise on Atonement, about a loving God.
Let it be asked, by what means are we brought to love God? Answer, we love him because he first loved us. God's love to us is antecedent to our love to him, which refutes the notion of God's receiving the atonement. But the idea that the manifestation of God's love to us causes us to love him and brings us to a renewal of love is perfectly consonant with the necessity of atonement. It shows us what atonement is, the power which the mediator must have and exercise in order to reconcile all things to God. The meaning by which we are brought to love any object, whatever is, by seeing or thinking we see some beauty in the object. And our love is always in proportion to the apparent good qualities of the object seen. Before you found peace, you thought you could see the justice of God in your eternal exclusion from heaven and happiness. Now I ask, can you find that God ever gave a law to man which required endless misery in case of disobedience? Sure I am that the scriptures speak of none, neither do the dictates of good reason admit of its existence. Perhaps my opponent may say, we are not to use our reason in matters of religion. I answer, if we are not to understand the things of God by scripture or reason, we are at a loss to know how to come at them. I have therefore argued this point particularly in order to show that such a penalty does not exist in the law of God. Do you think an exclusion from heaven and happiness would be an exclusion from holiness and righteousness? Did you ever see the justice of God in being you're sinful, unholy, and impure? Your answer, no. Then you never saw the justice of God in your endless exclusion from heaven and happiness.
sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may see all I possess, I'm striving so my love profess, but not believe my love within, that promise soon turns strangely dim. What is at the core of you? We've no creed, but guided only by love for the disenfranchised, every faith, culture, gender, age, sexual orientation. It's love that has and will guide us. We're the most imperfect, soulful fellowship imaginable, and our recipe, love. Where else would this gay Southern Baptist minister in love with a Buddhist find a spiritual home? Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control. Our spirits long to be made whole. That inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are free.
You have to remember that when Hosea Ballou wrote that, it was somewhat radical to just get rid of the idea of hell. Churches have been using that idea of hell quite successfully for a very long time. And so we go forward, and you might be thinking, as you heard Bob read Hosea Ballou's words, wow, that's really entrenched in old Christian theistic theology. And yes, that is our history. And we have come away since then. And so now you're thinking, I know what you're thinking. Oh, he's going to start talking about William Ellery Channing and Emerson and Theodore Parker. And he's going to talk about how these three central characters in different speeches or sermons that they gave transformed our faith and laid the groundwork for us becoming a more inclusive church that involves all different backgrounds and faiths. But no, I'm not going to talk about them. You might think, how can you give a history sermon and not talk about Channing, Emerson, or Parker? I'm just not. I had to make some choices. And so we're going to go right past what are called the three prophets of liberal religion and go to 1866. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was the most prominent African-American woman writer of her generation. She wrote Lola Leroy and other novels and stories and poems. She was an activist as well. She worked tirelessly on behalf of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the National Association of Colored Women, and the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the tradition in which she was raised. In time in her life, she founded the first Unitarian Church of Philadelphia in 1870 and became a member there. She held dual memberships with the Methodists and the Unitarians for the rest of her life. She gave a speech at a women's rights convention in New York City. She gave vivid testimony about the interlocking oppressions confronting Black women and called upon white women to practice a deeper kind of solidarity. This was long before the term intersectionality came into our lexicon. But here was Frances Ellen Watkins Harper imploring to the white women of her time seeking a vote that her life mattered as well.
We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity. And society cannot trample on the weakest and the feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. You tried that in the case of the Negro. You pressed him down for 2 centuries. And in so doing, you crippled the moral strength and paralyzed the spiritual energies of the white men of the country. When the hands of the blacks were fettered, white men were deprived of the liberty of speech and the freedom of the press. Society cannot afford to neglect the enlightenment of any class of its members. This grand and glorious revolution which has commenced will fail to reach its climax of success until, throughout the length and breadth of the American Republic, the nation shall be so colorblind as to know no man by the color of his skin or the curl of his hair. It will then have no privileged class trampling upon and enraging the unprivileged classes, but will then one great privileged nation whose privilege will be to produce the loftiest manhood and womanhood that humanity can attain. I do not believe that giving the woman the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs. I, as a colored woman, have had in this country an education which has made me feel as if I were in the situation of Ishmael, my hand against every man and every man's hand against me. Let me go tomorrow morning and take my seat in one of your streetcars. I do not know if they will do it in New York, but they will do it in Philadelphia. And the conductor will put up his hand and stop the car rather than let me ride.
Can you imagine the courage it would take a Black woman in 1866 to stand up in front of women fighting for suffrage, fighting for a vote, and say, we need more, we can do more, we must do more? Well, let's take another jump, of about 100 years. We'll skip a war, maybe 2 or 3 wars. The Humanist Manifesto in 1933. In 1961, there was the merger of the Unitarians and the Universalists to create the Unitarian Universalists, which we now know ourselves. In 1985, we adopted the 7 principles, but let's go past all of that to 1992. And we find ourselves in Massachusetts yet again. Kim Crawford Harvey. She wrote a homily entitled Give Thanks. She was a minister of the Unitarian Meeting House in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and there that was during the height of the AIDS crisis. And she formed deep relationships in that community, and it affected her, her congregation, and her ministry deeply. In 1989, she was called as the senior minister of Arlington Street Church in Boston. Arlington Street Church in Boston is kind of a big deal. It's one of our oldest and most prestigious pulpits, and she was the first woman to ever hold that pulpit, the first lesbian to ever lead a congregation in Boston. In 2004, she performed the first legally recognized same-sex marriage in a church in the United States. This is from a homily that she preached at Arlington Street Church in 1992, where she was drawing on her experiences during the AIDS crisis.
I'm thinking of Dennis. I saw him on the last afternoon he was coherent. I asked him what I should preach about on Sunday. It was not easy for him to speak, but he did without hesitation. Don't hate, he told me. No time. Facing death, life, the preciousness of life is clearer. I'm thinking of Paul. Paul was a big, blonde, boyish Midwesterner with the energy and exuberance of a Labrador retriever. On his own initiative with his Baptist heart, Paul recruited new church members by inviting groups of 6 friends at a time to Sunday brunch in his home. The hitch was that the invitation started with the church service from 11 to 12. If you planned to eat, you had to meet Paul in his pew. He was shameless. He was charming. I'm remembering one particular late summer Sunday afternoon. The last wedding party of the day was being photographed on the sunny front lawn of the church under a cloudless sky. Paul popped in and said, "My boat's at the pier. Let's go." I could see the Kaposi sarcoma erupting on his left calf. I was exhausted, but I went. Paul motored way out into the bay until the leaning steeple of the church took its place in Provincetown's silhouette on the horizon. He threw the anchor, and we sat there in silence. From a distance, the dying and death, loss and grieving all took their place. Then Paul said to me, "Listen, even if it kills every single one of us, even if there is no one left to tell the stories, it matters that we care for each other in all this madness. It matters that even in the face of death, we love each other well." Within the year, Paul spoke his last words, which were later inscribed on his gravestone, "Speak from your heart." No time to hate. It matters that we love each other well. It doesn't get any better than this. Give thanks.
Thumbing through Unitarian Universalist documents, one comes across a lot of resolutions, statements of principle and purpose that happen at our General Assembly each year. All kinds of resolutions, ones about anti-racism and same-sex marriage, reproductive justice, ethical eating, and environmental concerns. But those are really dry, so we're not doing any resolutions today. We'll end with some words from Peter Morales. Peter was elected to the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in 2009. He had been a minister at the Jefferson Unitarian Church in Golden, Colorado, and he was our first Latino president. He campaigned for the presidency of the UUA on a platform that emphasized multicultural growth. Almost immediately after he was elected president, the anti-immigration legislation came down, including Arizona law that empowered local police to check the immigration status of every single person they detained. Perhaps you remember Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Well, that year was set to have General Assembly in the summer in Phoenix. Activists called for a boycott, saying, "Don't come to our state." And in relationship with those activists, we decided to come, but come seeking justice instead. So that was the first Justice General Assembly. It minimized ordinary business, and it prioritized engaging with local partners and social witness. And Peter Morales led that group of people, myself included, to that jail. And we sang songs and we held vigil in hopes that those inside might hear our words of support and solidarity. We do know that Joe Arpaio heard our words and our song for sure. He spoke these words at a social justice convocation that was 3 years before General Assembly.
We find the same message in every tradition. We are one. We are connected. We are brothers and sisters. If we truly accept that we are all part of the greater whole, that what unites and transcends us is ultimately more important than our illusion of individuality. How then might that guide us? If we accept that compassion literally means to share, to suffer with, is a manifestation of realizing that we are one. What are the implications of that? What would our community and our state and our nation do if they're guided by the finest aspirations of humanity's religions? What would you and I do if we were guided by these very same ideas as expressed in our Unitarian Universalist principles? What future might we build if we created policies guided by our notions of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations? We must also acknowledge that we help to create the situation in which displaced persons look to find a home here. America has already been transformed by the latest waves of immigration. Our children and grandchildren are going to live in a multicultural society, a society of mushu burritos, egg roll tacos, and whole wheat tortillas. We need not be afraid of that multicultural society. Fear leads to violence and repression. Instead, let us embrace the possibilities before us. Let us be guided by love and hope. Let our actions emerge from the deep conviction that people from Mexico, Korea, Canada, Vietnam are ultimately part of our extended family. Surely religious people have learned to embrace the wisdom of Judaism, Christianity, humanism, Islam, Eastern religions that can lead the way. We are people who have always affirmed human diversity. We have always looked to the future and seen new possibilities. We must do so again. Let us be the people who break down the arbitrary barriers that divide us from them. We are one, and love and hope will guide us. Let us, together with our brothers and sisters, build a new way.
So what? What does it matter? This history of ours. These are just 6 tiny little pieces, each just scratching the surface of deep issues of individual lives. Ours is a history of heretics, of people speaking out against the authority, of saying that there is a possible better way. This liberal religious tradition offers us that gift, that it is a living tradition that continues to grow, continues to evolve, continues to challenge itself to do and be better. Our group sang, "Though I may speak with bravest fire." Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, but have not love, my words are vain, as sounding brass and hopeless gain. These heretics who spoke out, who saw a better way, they were connected by something. Peter Morales said, "Let us be guided by love and hope." Let us be guided by love and hope. When we look back on history, we see individuals and they rise like luminaries. We think, how did they do it in those extraordinary times? But for them, those were just called the times. Those were the days of their lives. And so it falls to us too. In the future, folks will refer to these as extraordinary times, but for us, these are our times. And so we wonder, what are we called to do during these times? Looking back in history, we can see all kinds of ills, but we know we can look around our world today and see all kinds of ills. Currently, we deal with white supremacy and immigration and polarization of politics and poverty, and not the least of which, kindness, an absence of kindness in our civil discourse. And so, what does it matter? We look backwards for inspiration. We look backwards to our history to see where it is that we were, to better situate ourselves and understand where it is we are today. And we do this because we want to be guided by love and hope as we look toward the future. What will we be? What are we called to be in this moment which will be history someday? But history is written in the moment. So what shall we do? What mark will we leave? We look back at these extraordinary figures. For them, they were just answering the call in their life, the call towards love and hope. May we answer that call as well. And when future generations look backwards into our history, may they see the mark that we made of one in love and one of hope. May it be so this day and every day. We would be one. That is a statement of love, and that is a statement of hope. Will you say with me the words of the covenant of this fellowship, which are printed in your fresh sheet? Love is the spirit of this fellowship. And to help one another. Make no mistake about it, after you leave here today and go into your afternoon, you're going to make history just by the very living of your life. Now, it might not be the kind of history that ends up in a book, and that's okay. Or maybe it is. I don't know what you have planned for your afternoon. Either way, whatever it is that this day brings you, go forward with love and hope in your heart, whether that's a nap or trying to save the world. Go forth with the full knowledge that this place invites you into and supports you in a life of love and a life of hope. Go in peace.
We did. What we did.
Thank you for doing it.